A windless night, 1841, a procession of barefoot women in white slips descends silently into a pit behind a chapel. They do not return. A hymn plays backward, then silence. 278 women, never found, no records. No graves, just the doctrine, buried in the black soil of southern Indiana. There once stood a religious commune called New Belden Parish, a place never spoken of in polite company. The church there taught a doctrine no man outside its walls ever read. And women who entered, mothers, daughters, widows, were stripped of names, history, and voice. From 1841 to 1856, 278 women disappeared inside the doctrine, not runaways, not murdered, not missing, gone, without trace, without inquiry. The last census before the parish burned to the ground listed over 300 women. When the fire consumed it in 1857, only 19 were pulled from the wreckage, all male, all silent. What were they promised? What were they told? Who wrote the doctrine, and why did it end in ashes? This is the forgotten story of a religious experiment gone wrong, of a town swallowed by silence, and of a belief so corrosive it consumed every woman who ever embraced it. New Belden wasn't founded. It was carved out. In 1838, a traveling minister from Philadelphia, Reverend Elias Corwin, arrived in Monroe County with 30 wagons, 12 men, and no women. Locals remember his eyes, cloudy white, as if he looked always inward. He claimed he had been given a vision, a great correction, a spiritual architecture that would purify all carnal confusion. He bought 80 acres with cash, silver dollars newly minted, and within months a spired chapel rose, whitewashed and windowless. The sermons were never public, the congregation was never seen, but women from nearby towns began vanishing, quietly, one by one. Some were newly converted, others were simply invited to help clean, cook, or rest. None returned, whispers spread, but no one challenged Reverend Corwin. He was charming, articulate, and above all, legally protected. Every document bore the mark of compliance. No law was broken, only people. Families who knocked on the chapel doors left without answers. Some were told their daughters had chosen silence. Others received cryptic notes, always signed the same way. She is now inside the doctrine. By 1841, New Belden had become a self-sufficient religious territory, ruled by theology no outsider had ever seen. The doctrine, what little survives, was not scripture. It was ritual. Recovered fragments hint at a belief that women's voices fractured divine harmony. That silence was not oppression but sanctification. Women were called vessels of stillness. Speaking, it said, was violence. To be truly pure, one must become invisible. The doctrine divided women into stages, the severing, the quieting, and the diminishment. Each stage demanded less food, less clothing, fewer words. Girls as young as 11 were inducted, the eldest, a 54-year-old widow who gave up her name in exchange for perfect containment. In the severing, women cut ties to the world, family, memory, and even mirrors. In the quieting, they lived in windowless dormitories, denied daylight and speech. In the diminishment, they simply vanished. The doctrine said they ascended into correction. No one ever saw what that meant. Only men copied the text. Only men could recite it. But women carried its cost. When former clergy were interviewed decades later, haggard, guilt-racked, none would speak of the diminishment. One simply said it was not death, it was something deeper, something beneath death. In the summer of 1844, a traveling Baptist minister named Josiah Moore claimed he heard the most beautiful choir he'd ever encounter, echoing from deep inside New Belden's chapel. But when he approached, Reverend Corwin invited him to stay the night. He declined. By the following morning, he was found wandering barefoot 15 miles away, mumbling the same phrase over and over. They had no eyes. Witnesses say Corwin never denied the existence of a women's choir. He merely called them the throatless ones. No records exist of their names, and none were ever seen again. Some say the women were sewn shut. Others insist their voices were somehow drawn out. made into a permanent sound that echoed only within the chapel walls. When the parish burned, the townsfolk swore they heard 1,000 female voices screaming in unison, but no bodies were recovered. A fire chief, who refused to speak publicly, later told his daughter something strange. The flames didn't come from outside. They came from underneath, from the rooms no one was supposed to know were there. When the chapel was built, the foundation went deeper than it should have. Workers later admitted they dug for weeks, crafting what they believed were wine cellars and cold storage rooms. But after finishing, they were dismissed, paid generously, silenced through nondis, closure pledges. In 1871, a storm unearthed part of the original substructure. Inside, authorities found remnants of beds, rows of them, metal, framed, bolted to stone, no windows, no ventilation. Shackles were welded into the walls. But it was what they didn't find that disturbed them more. There were no bones, no remains, just clothing. Hundreds of threadbare gowns, all the same shade of off-white, all child-sized or petite. On one wall, a single phrase was carved in a looping feminine script. We were taught to leave no shadow. Why build such rooms beneath a chapel? Why chain silence in darkness? And how did so many vanish? Without a trace of struggle, the deeper one looks, the more the doctrine reveals itself, not as religion but as engineering, the engineering of erasure. Locals remember the bell of New Belden Chapel. It rang every morning at 4:17 a.m., never late, never early. Yet no one was ever seen pulling the rope, no bell ringer was hired, no mechanism installed. In 1846, a boy from the outskirts claimed he snuck in during the night and saw the bell swing by itself. When asked what powered it, he simply said, "A face under the rope." He died 3 days later, choking on his own tongue. When the parish fell, the bell was taken down and stored in the Bloomington Historical Vault. Years later, guards began reporting strange noises, low, metallic sobbing coming from inside the sealed crate. The bell was quietly returned to New Belden's ashes and buried. A priest familiar with the doctrine once said that bell didn't call people to worship, it marked departures. Each time it rang, another woman passed into the diminishment. They weren't announced, they weren't mourned, they were processed. Elias Corwin was no ordinary preacher. He arrived in Monroe County already claiming divine revelation, but not from Scripture, from something older. His journals, discovered after the fire, tell of whispers beneath sleep, a presence he called the instruction. He wrote of a faceless woman with silver eyes who appeared in dreams, guiding his hand across paper. The doctrine, he insisted, was not written, it was transcribed. Born to a mother who died during his birth, Corwin was raised in an orphanage that practiced enforced silence. He didn't speak until he was 12, and when he did, his voice was described as not his own. In 1835, he vanished for 6 months. Upon returning, he claimed he had seen the mouth beneath the world. It was then that the idea for New Belden was born. Authorities later found hundreds of pages of his writings, rituals involving bloodless disappearances, the stripping of ego, and a process called unbinding the vessel. All of it centered on women. To Corwin, femininity was the final door before divine order, but to everyone else, he was a butcher cloaked in prayer. When the parish burned in 1857, 19 men were pulled from the wreckage. They were naked, shaved bald, covered in faint writing, tiny glyphs etched into their skin with ash and oil. None of them would speak, not to family, not to doctors, not even to each other. 5 committed suicide within a year. 3 were institutionalized after gouging out their own eyes. The others vanished, one by one, wandering into forests, rivers, fields, never returning. One survivor, James Hollow, briefly regained clarity in an asylum. He whispered just 4 words before biting off his own tongue, "She's still under us." When pressed, doctors found a small paper sealed beneath his tongue, reading, "The doctrine cannot be unlearned." Their bodies bore no wounds, but their souls were gone. Whatever they saw during the diminishment left them fractured, hollowed, and the women, not a single one was recovered. It was as if the fire incinerated memory itself. Surrounding towns, Bloomington, Harrodsburg, Ellettsville, were not ignorant of New Belden. They were complicit. Women went missing from their homes. Girls left schools with notes citing divine invitation. Yet no one called the sheriff. No one protested. Why? Because New Belden cured sickness, revived crops, ended droughts. Locals claimed their children stopped having nightmares after visiting the parish, and more disturbingly, many offered their daughters willingly. The doctrine seduced through results. It was said that if a woman vanished into its teachings, her family would flourish. One merchant watched his profits triple. A widow remarried after donating her only daughter. In return, her barren fields bloomed overnight. One father reportedly wept while handing over his 13-year-old, saying, "I love her, but we need rain." The town prospered, and for that they traded silence for silence until the fire forced history to remember. When the chapel burned, the flames were unnatural. Witnesses say the fire gave off no heat, but sounds, screams layered in tones like choirs from multiple throats. It burned for 3 days, yet the structure never collapsed. The walls blackened, but held. When it finally fell, the ash was cold. No embers, no smoke, just soot as fine as flour, and strangely magnetic. Children who played near it later developed fevers and violent hallucinations. One drew a woman with her mouth sewn shut and nails for eyes. Authorities ordered the site buried under 7 feet of earth. Concrete was poured. A playground was built in 1902, only for it to be abandoned within a year after 3 girls disappeared during recess. The land was never resold. Today it sits fenced off. No signage, no entry. Locals call it still ground. A wax cylinder, discovered in the belongings of an early ethnomusicologist, holds a chilling recording. It's labeled New Belden Entrance Rite 1851. The song is incomprehensible, sung in a language that doesn't match any known dialect. Experts call it a reverse canticle, structured to lull and subdue. When played in its entirety, several listeners reported sleep paralysis, nosebleeds, and overwhelming feelings of drowning. At minute 3:47, a phrase repeats 16 times, "She walks in the walls." A surviving former choir boy later admitted the hymn was sung only once a year. On the eve of the diminishment, every woman would gather at the lower chapel entrance, clothed in white, heads shaved, eyes closed. When asked what the hymn was for, he replied, "To tell the wall she's ready." The doctrine ritual had 3 phases. The pouring, a woman would kneel beneath a hole in the chapel ceiling. A black liquid, extracted from roots grown beneath the chapel, was poured over her head. This symbolized the washing away of the ego's shadow. Roman 2. The breaking, she would be isolated for 39 days in a soundless chamber with nothing but a mirror. Her only allowed word was unsee. Roman 3. The diminishment, the final phase. At 4:17 a.m. the bell would ring. She would walk into the lower chapel. No one saw her exit, ever. What lay beyond that final threshold? No man spoke of it. No document described it. Some believe she was burned. Others say she was integrated into the chapel's foundation. But many hold a darker view, that the doctrine did not destroy women. It moved them into some spiritual, psychospiritual, or subterranean realm. One from which they continue to whisper just beneath our hearing. In 1928, renovations began on a farmhouse built from bricks salvaged from New Belden's ruins. Behind the hearth, workers found a folded note hidden in mortar. It read, "My name was Ruth. My sister was taken first. I resisted. They cut my tongue, but I remember my name. If this reaches someone, do not listen to the hymn. The doctrine is not salvation. It is hunger." The handwriting was cramped, blood-stained. No Ruth ever appeared in the records of New Belden. No sisters were mentioned in any logs, but the note was verified as pre-1850 ink and paper. More disturbingly, the blood used for the writing was not entirely human. Its protein structure bore markers closer to fetal tissue. The note was sealed away. 2 days later, the farmhouse burned to the ground. No cause was ever determined. In the 1940s, the U.S. Psychological Warfare Division acquired documents linked to New Belden. They became the basis for Project Lamina, a short-lived secret experiment in auditory containment. Participants, mostly women, were isolated and read modified fragments of the doctrine backwards. After 3 days, all 16 reported the same hallucination, a faceless woman in a chapel basement, extending her arms in invitation. By day 6, 3 participants disappeared from locked rooms. One was found alive years later in a Michigan convent, unable to speak but endlessly mouthing, "She's still choosing." The project was terminated, all files marked classified. To this day, references to the doctrine remain redacted across all government documentation. Throughout the chapel ruins, one symbol recurs, etched, painted, branded, a circle of thorns surrounding a blank face. No mouth, no eyes, just indentations as if erased, later dubbed the mouthless halo. It became a sigil for the final stage of womanhood under the doctrine, erasure through sacred silence. Even today, versions of the symbol have appeared in disturbing places, graffitied in abandoned convents, scratched into asylum cell walls, even tattooed on women recovered from cult compounds. What does it represent? Submission, salvation, disappearance, or is it a warning from the forgotten that silence is not safety, but a door? In 1891, Dr. Harlan Vess attempted to reconstruct the doctrine using notes gathered from surviving clergy. His goal, to reverse the ritual, to bring the women back. He vanished after publishing the first 32 pages of his manuscript, undoing the silence. The final line reads, "I have seen them. They stand beneath my home. They do not age. They do not blink. They do not forgive." The manuscript was pulled from shelves. All remaining copies were collected and burned. Some say Dr. Vess's house still stands, boarded up and surrounded by salt circles. Locals avoid it. Dogs refuse to approach. At night, some say you can hear faint humming beneath the floorboards. 278 women disappeared, and yet strange disappearances continue, following the doctrine's blueprint. In 1983, 11 women vanished from a therapeutic retreat in Vermont. Each left behind a white slip and a note marked with the mouthless halo. In 2002, a college sorority in Oregon dissolved overnight. No explanation. Security footage showed 17 girls walking single, file into the woods, never returning. The doctrine did not die with Corwin. It adapted, moved, hid. It still calls women toward stillness, toward erasure, and some still answer. There's a reason no history book mentions New Belden, why the doctrine is not taught, why its fire is never marked, because institutions protect their own. The church called it an unauthorized sect. The state called it voluntary religious relocation. Universities labeled it folklore. But survivors tell a different story, of systemic disappearance, of spiritualized abuse disguised as holiness, of rituals funded and enabled by men in power. Silence wasn't just the doctrine's command. It was its currency, and silence, when normalized, becomes a prison. In 2023, a researcher uncovered blueprints of New Belden's foundations. They showed one chamber never explored, deeper than all the rest, marked only with the symbol of the mouthless halo. No one has dared dig, but those who study the doctrine believe that chamber still holds the last 12 women who entered the diminishment, not dead, not alive, held waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. This story is not just about the past, it's about the doctrine inside us now, the one that tells women to be quiet, to erase, to conform, to disappear. 278 women vanished into ritual, into obedience, into a lie made holy. They did not die by fire. They were swallowed by belief, and perhaps they are not gone at all. Perhaps they wait beneath the floorboards of every institution that tells a woman to be less. Less loud, less wild, less seen, this was the doctrine that made them disappear, but their silence, it's starting to crack.